So we've been over at the shipyard and looked at a lot of different boats and seen a lot of different aspects of the boats through the course of the day so far. But we figured we'd take the opportunity to come over to Apollo Lighting because we have the ability to look at all the different types of lights that are available. This segment's going to speak specifically to light conversions and what we can specify in new products. We're here today, or for this segment at least, with Karen Poulos from Lynn Interiors and also from Brandy Porter
Hi.
from Apollo Lighting. So what we want to talk about today, ladies, is more in regard to two different things, actually. We can talk about retrofitting boats that have old lighting systems in them, because that's an important component, but also maybe some of the specified applications that we want to use in new boats as well. So Karen, primarily what you do is you look to the design aspects and how lighting is going to affect the way the interior of the boat looks and the utility of the boat for the people. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So what are some of the most important considerations that you will take into account when you're designing a lighting scheme for a boat?
Well, it depends, Paul, if that's going to be a refit or new construction. So I kind of approach those two kind of projects in a different way. So for a retrofit, you would go into the boat and look at the existing system in the boat, the type of construction of the overhead, whether that's a stretch whisper wall type system, an upholstered panel system, or a hard paneled system.
Okay.
You would see the diameter of the existing cans, what kind of electrical supply they have in there, what is the owner or the captain looking to do with the system. Is he looking just to try to replace the bulbage and do kind of the minimal required, or are they looking to do a bigger project, which would involve the headliner as a aspect of the interior changes. So if the headliner is just one component, then it may involve redesigning all of the lighting and the headliner. And of course, this is a different.
So it just depends upon how far he wants to go with the project.
Exactly.
He or she wants to go.
Exactly.
So if they want to do a complete redesign, or if they're thinking about just trying to utilize some of the components that are there and update them to a more modern program.
Exactly.
Okay. So what's one of the biggest benefits of going over to LED, for example? That seems to be the thing today. Why would we go to LED instead of having halogen?
Well, LED, first of all, is much cooler than your halogen fixtures.
So physically, temperature-wise.
Yes.
Okay.
So your air conditioning systems on board are not working as hard. Your generators are not pulling out as much power.
Okay.
And also there's a less chance of fire on board the boat.
So it's safer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. And then also the bulb replacement, LED fixtures or the bulbs themselves last longer. Halogen bulbs in the past have been very expensive.
Sure.
You have to replace them constantly. LED bulbs, I believe, are six years. Sometimes you can get out of them.
50,000 hours.
Yeah,
So
depending
that's leaving them on all the time.
Yeah. So there's an initial cost in the upfront of doing an LED conversion, but over time, with all these different factors, it actually is a savings. Because if you're not spending money on bulbage, you're saving money on generators, AC. You're not having to replace the AC as much because the boat is staying cooler. Overall, it's going to be a savings.
Okay.
It's more energy efficient.
You also don't have to have a shelf full of bulbs just to be able to keep the lights on in your boat.
Exactly.
So when you're considering the utility, you're considering temperature, functional temperature of the fixtures. Mm-hmm. You're also trying to consider what mood you're creating in the boat. Is that correct? I mean, what sort of things would you take into consideration in that regard?
So I always like to look at the different types of lighting that are in the boat. Typically you have your cans, you have your rope lighting, you have your courtesy lights, which are usually on your stairs. You have some sort of lamps, decorative accent lighting we call it, your flush mounts or your dining room fixture. Sometimes in some of the bigger boats you'll get flush mounts in some of the cabins and the lower deck foyers. You can have that type of fixture. You can also have sconce lighting. Okay. You can have reading lights. Okay. So there's like 6 or 7 different types of interior light fixtures that we use typically on board. And so I like to kind of see what is the look that we're going for as far as, are we going to be doing a major retrofit, or are we going to go in and just kind of use the existing placement and just replace the fixtures? Okay. So we look at that. We look at the location of the controls. So for example, at the aft deck door, typically you might have a panel that's controlling all of the lighting in the salon, and then maybe at the main deck foyer, you would also have that same switching that's controlling the salon. So that's what they call a two-way switching. So you have two locations to switch the same set of lighting.
So that's a consideration in what you're going to choose as well.
Yes, and how it's going to be switched. So for example, as well, like if you have a lamp in the salon, most of the time we're hardwiring that lamp through the piece of furniture. So if the person is sitting on the sofa and they want to lean over and switch that lamp on and off by hand, then of course that's not going to be integrated into the actual VMAR, Crestron, Lutron, or Savant system. The cans, the rope lighting, the sconce lighting, the anything that's wired into the headliner typically would be something that's done on the circuitry of the VMAR and the switching controls at the aft or at the main deck foyer. And I'm just using that as an example.
So those sort of components will be decisions on the engineering side as to after you've done your design plan and you've worked with the owner to determine what it is that you want to highlight, accentuate, or soften, you'll bring that to Apollo, and Brandy and her team will work on the engineering components of that, correct?
Well, what I like to do is either meet with the owner or the captain or the decision maker. Sometimes the owner just tells me to work with the captain or the engineer, and we do an actual physical walkthrough. And we actually take a plan, a layout of the boat, and locate, okay, where are we going to put the switching? If there's not switching already there, and we're going to add it in, or we're going to add outlets, we're going to add iPad, docking stations or whatever. We put it all on a paper plan, and then we actually draw it in AutoCAD.
Okay.
And then we would take that and give that to Apollo.
Okay.
And then they would take that and price that out.
Okay, so they'll make the application as to the fixtures and all the rest of it. Something I'd like to step to before we go over into the engineering side of it is when you walk on board the boat, and let's say we're just going to upgrade the lighting in the boat. I hear talk about temperature and color. How do you consider what colors or temperatures of light you want to use, especially in relation to like the interior components, and if it's wood or if it's more modern? Are these all things that you have to think about when you're designing your light schemes?
Yes, absolutely. So typically on many boats, you have a beautiful wood going throughout at some level, shape, or form. So warm LEDs, warm rope lighting typically is the way that I go. Even in the galley, where you have more of a utilitarian area, you can go with a higher or a more powerful fixture, but still you want to stay in that warm family. Very rarely do I personally use the cooler LEDs. I find that they tend to give off that real clinical or hospital type setting, almost like that you would see in an emergency room or something like that. And it's not becoming, it's not flattering to all of the materials and the food, even if you were to put it in the galley. I mean, it's not something that I use very often.
The last thing we want to think of when we walk in the boat is that we've just entered the emergency room. There's no doubt about it. I think there's a panel over here on the wall that has a few of the different colored lights. Could we take a look at that and maybe get an example?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So Brandy's going to be our switch consultant here. So here we get 3 different colors of light. Is that what you call these, as colors, right? Or temperatures?
Temperature, yes.
Maybe you can explain to us what those temperatures or colors are, Randy.
Certainly. So we have warm white, which is what Karen was mentioning that she typically goes with. And then the extreme side, other side of it would be a cool white, which is kind of that hospitality or hospitarian or
more clinical looking?
More clinical looking. And then there is a neutral that it's, I say recently, within the last couple of years, more and more manufacturers are coming out with it because people more are leaning towards the cooler side of it, but they don't want that stark in your face, and it kind of is a happy medium in between the warm and the cool.
So it has a little more modern feel.
Has a little bit more modern feel, but exactly. So
all right. So these are considerations that you're going to bring into play when you're determining what lighting schemes you want to design for the boat. And when I talk about lighting schemes, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about just overall? Or are we talking about how when you go to a switch, a certain number of lights come on that create a certain mood?
Yeah, so when I do my lighting package, there's a couple different components. Typically, I do the lighting plan. I do a set of specs. So, for example, whatever fixtures whatever rope lighting, whatever decorative fixtures are selected, I give a spec sheet to the client or to the captain and to the electrician as well. So everybody has a copy of what we're going to be using. And then we're also looking at circuitry. So how do we want that lighting to come on? How do we want that lighting to, if that lighting is going to be dimmable, what location it's going to be switched from. For example, if you have in the salon, you have a dining room fixture and you have a rope lighting that's underneath your woodwork and maybe up in your, in your air plantum or something like that. And you want that dimmable and you want that to be your evening kind of mood, then you would maybe put your dining room fixture and your sconces on that same circuit. Some people put it separately. It's really personally like a personal decision. And what I like to do is make a suggestion for the client or make a suggestion in the lighting plan. And I say, do you approve this? This is what I would do. And sometimes I have the client say, you know what, I want to have them all separate. But when you do tie them up together, it creates a mood and it's like creating almost like a scene. So they come into the boat in the evening and they're able to turn on with one switch several different types of light, even a lamp maybe, and it creates a mood.
So let me dig into that for just one quick second, Karen, if you don't mind. So let's say we've got a boat that's, say it's 15 years old and the lighting system in there is all working well, but we want to modernize and update. And everybody knows LED is the thing to do and the way to go now. Can we just go into the boat and replace all the bulbs with LED bulbs and maintain the same functionality that we've always had?
Sometimes you can. In that case, I would call Brandy or somebody from her organization from Apollo, and they would come out to the boat and they would make a recommendation.
Okay. So sometimes we could just change out the bulbs and still have full dimmability, but is that always the case?
No. So like especially when switching over to LED, you have, you may have to integrate a new LED dimming module because even though they were dimming before, that switch now needs to speak to an LED compatible dimming module.
So it's a balanced system that was there before.
Correct. So you have a different type of lighting. There's different loads. So on the lowest dimming side, you might see some flickering if you don't switch over or you didn't know to do such a thing. So in that case, then you would have to switch out your dimming module from the old halogen style to the newer updated LED.
Okay, so it's not just as simple as changing a bulb sometimes.
Correct.
Sometimes if we want to maintain the full functionality, we have to go a little bit deeper, change the bulb and the controlling system behind it.
That's correct.
As well. But we can typically keep the same switches and things like that.
Yeah, generally speaking, yes.
Okay, all right. I didn't mean to divert your focus there, Karen, but I thought that was important because sometimes people think that they can just change a bulb and maintain the same system as they had it.
No, that's a good clarification.
Okay, all right.
Very good.
So you're talking about building schemes. So when you walk into the dining salon, for example, you may want to choose to hit a switch, and depending upon what the owner's desires are, you may have rope lighting and a chandelier and some indirect lighting in the toe kicks around the room. And he may want to choose to have that dimmable or not dimmable. And all of these different considerations come into play when you're talking about the look that you want to build and the design that you have to make it all work with.
Right.
Randy, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
Yes. And so all of that would be designated on an architectural lighting plan.
Okay.
That would actually have switch locations, the type of light fixtures on the
So
legends.
this is an example of a plan that you would draw for your client after you've spoken with him as to what he wants it to look like ultimately. And then this you can give to Apollo to go ahead and build the system out for you.
Absolutely.
Okay. And they'll indicate exactly what kind of fixtures are needed, what sort of dimmable modules have to be replaced or can be maintained. And so when they look at something like this, do they have the option of a cheap, middle road, expensive? Is it always going to be expensive? Is it always going to be cheap? What do you advise them when they say to you, well, all right, what's it going to cost me, Karen?
Well, typically, again, like when I go into the boat initially to determine what type of work is going to be done. Are they just looking to upgrade the lighting or to do the ceiling? Or are they looking to do a complete refit? When I have the lighting plans drawn up, I like to give them a couple different options as far as cost. So then I would turn the lighting plans over to Apollo and then they would make, a couple different recommendations as to how to approach it.
Okay.
You know, they would go and physically inspect the existing control system, what needs to be done as far as the dimming modules, the wiring, you know, any other upgrades that's underneath the ceiling that I can't see. So I'm dealing with more of the aesthetic and some of the technical, but they are really the ones that do the deep technical and the wiring and, you know, all of those kind of components. So we work together as a team.
So there's a consideration, I think, in all of this as to whether you're going to use DC or AC electricity to power these lights as well, correct?
Yes.
So there may have been 110 volt lighting or AC power in the boat that provided the light, but with the new system, would it always be the same, or do we sometimes actually have to change the voltage?
That depends, of course, again, on what the captain, the owner, the engineer spec out. They'll usually give me the input as far as what they want to do.
Okay.
So if they're already on a low voltage system,
Okay.
typically because when we're getting involved with the refits, the decorative lighting, so the sconces, the dining room fixture, the flush mounts, for example, or even the self switch lamps, will be more of a residential type fixture, which is the 110 fixture.
So that's going to be an AC fixture, like you could buy at Home Depot, for example.
Well,
Sorta.
not exactly. Yes, something like that. So, so then you're going to have two sets of power. So you're going to have the 110 for the decorative fixtures, and you're going to have the low voltage of the existing system. So then you're going to need something like a converter, which Apollo would come in, and again, they would look at all of the different components behind the scenes, the technical equipment that's needed to actually make the lighting design work.
Okay.
And they'll make recommendations and, of course, give the estimate based on that.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So I think it has probably a lot to do with the input you get from the broker as to whether he left the guy any money to do his refits or not, right?
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So we start with an idea, a concept, as to what are we trying to accomplish. Do we just want to change a couple of bulbs, or do we want to change the entire mood of the boat? Do we want to bring the boat into a relaxing, warm and inviting ambiance? Or some people want a more austere, modern look about their boat, more of a Miami Beach condominium look, if you will. So the first considerations that you would take in would be what mood are they trying to create, and then how far we want to go with the different system, and then we have to go into the engineering side of it.
Yes.
So with the engineering side of it, Brandy, where are most of the lights made? Are they made in America, or do we bring them in from other countries? Are they mostly foreign built?
Some of them are American made, but many of them are, are not, and they are out of Italy or Greece.
I think
UK,
Italy's pretty well known for lighting fixtures. I think a lot of people are accustomed to the different Italian brands.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So when we're taking that into consideration, is sourcing that stuff difficult, or is it generally pretty available?
Generally speaking, I mean, it's pretty available. There are some fixtures that are more popular that we tend to stock. But then there's some others that, may have to be ordered. And depending on the lead time, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 8 weeks. It just kind of depends on the actual fixture that you're actually there or the customer's wanting to order. Okay. But we do try to generally stock a lot here, and you make sure things are, readily available, because everybody wants everything yesterday.
Of course they do, and they want it for half price too. So what's probably the biggest consideration that you run into when someone wants to redesign a lighting scheme in the boat? What's the biggest challenge that you usually run into?
If they have existing holes and trying to find something, because sometimes these fixtures are an odd size because they are much older and things have come, around and maybe are a different size and not available in that size anymore. So they may have to generally open the hole. So that's something that may want to take into consideration. If they're not redoing the headliner, budget is always, something to take into consideration.
Well, it's always an important consideration in everything.
Sure. I mean, we generally like to try and give two options, because a lot of times they think they want to do this huge big refit and spend all this money, but not really knowing what that cost is going to involve, and then it's quoted, and then they're like, oh my goodness. So then so out of the gate, it's always nice to say, okay, well, if you have existing fixtures that you can use and you just want to upgrade the bulb, This is the cost involved. Or if you want to take it a step further and, redo all new fixtures, maybe, they have old round and want to go to a more modern feel, like a square fixture that, and it would be a totally new fixture. That would generally be a little bit more money and cost involved.
Are there any adapters available for any of this, from old popular style fixtures to newer fixtures, or is it typically you have to replace the entire thing?
No, everybody's tried to keep it the same in terms of the hole size, but there are some older styles that are, especially with like courtesy lights.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a lot of times there were much bigger holes, and now they're much smaller.
Okay.
So we kind of run into some issues
with carpentry.
There.
We run into carpentry or fiberglass issues where you've got to fill holes or finish surfaces and things of that nature.
Yeah. So you have
the
that
expense
cost.
of the light is significantly less, and the expense of putting it in is significantly more.
Right. Correct.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wonder if you could give us a little bit more understanding of is light temperature and color.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked briefly about this. How do they do that? Do they do it through different voltage, or they do it through, how is it done?
Well, most of the LEDs are low voltage, especially in the downlights and courtesy lighting. That's all going to be generally 10 to 30 volt. They usually have a range 10 to 40, 10 to 30 volt DC. Mm-hmm. So sometimes if they don't have low voltage already in place, we are using step down transformers.
Okay.
If they don't want to convert anything over, which is not out of the ordinary at all. Generally speaking either. So, and then color temperature, as Karen mentioned, a lot of the interior, we have a lot of people coming here and they think they want that cool white, and then they see it, on a display, and they're like, maybe I don't want that. Especially like she said, with the wood tones inside, it, something that is so stark and cool white can make your wood in your boat, and especially on the inside where you're, spending some quality time and you have that ambiance that you want, or having a dinner party, and it makes your wood, this beautiful wood that you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, look ugly almost.
Or to choose a blue light and put it over an area where it might be dining on the aft deck, and suddenly realize that all of your guests look like they're very sick and the food doesn't look very appetizing.
Exactly.
Right.
So these are all part of your considerations when you do your design scheme.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have been on many boats that have done LED conversions that weren't done through, a person that really knew what they were looking at. And you see a lot of times boats installed with the wrong color lighting, or they have mixtures of different colors. So they have some of the cooler LEDs mixed with warms. They have, it's crazy. So
well, that's why it's critically important to bring an expert in. Yeah. Sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to spend the money to do that. But the reality is that the value is there, because the end product is going to be something that's much more desirable. So to do it once and do it right is quite often cheaper than to do it twice and doing it wrong the first time.
Absolutely.
No doubt. Well, thanks, ladies, very much. I think you've given us a lot of great insight in the regard of new lighting styles, new lighting techniques, and things to keep in mind when we're talking about retrofitting or designing a scheme for a new boat. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.